Alright, today we're going to learn more about percents. You'll be able to change fractions and decimals to percents, and you can change percents to fractions and decimals, and then we're going to be able to find percent of a number. This is the foldable that you'll be using. You can see that if you can fold it, okay, along this line right here, and then you'll be able to write under each flap on the inside. Okay, so you'll be able to write all of your notes right inside there. Alright, let's first talk about moving fractions to decimals. Okay, this should be review. This is something that we've talked a lot about. Okay, remember when I have a fraction like 4 over 5, that means to divide. Okay, the top number goes in the box, or the numerator is what we call it, and the denominator on the outside. Okay, so if I take 4 and divide it by 5, notice the whole point of it is to change it to a decimal, so that's what I want to do. 5 can't go into 4, so I put my 0. Okay, I add my decimals, and I add my next 0, and 5 goes into 40 8 times, so that is 8/10. Now, if you want to change a fraction to a percent, you have to first change your fraction to a decimal, and then you can move your decimal into a percent. Okay, so if I have the fraction 3/5, the first thing I need to do is divide. Okay, 3 goes in the box, 5 goes outside the box. 5 can't go into 3, so I put my 0. I put my decimals in my 0. Okay, 5 goes into 30 6 times, and I subtract 30, and I get 0. Now, my answer is 6/10. Okay, now in order to make that into a percent, I know a percent is out of 100. Okay, and the 100th is actually 2 places behind the decimal. So even though this is only has one digit, hey, I still need to move my decimal 2 spots to the right. And then if I have an empty space there, I add a 0. Okay, so 3/5 is the same thing as 60%. Alright, now we're going to talk about decimals to percents and decimals to fractions. Okay, you should be on this section of your foldable right here, so you should be writing under that flap. Alright, first thing we're going to talk about is writing it as a decimal to a fraction. Okay, and that's write it as you read it. So if I have a decimal like this, I say that is 5, and because it's one spot behind the decimal, that is 5/10. I see the word 10 in there, so 5 goes over 10, and then I need to simplify. 5 over 10, I can divide them both by 5, and that is 1/2. Okay, if I have 88.88, okay, I have 88, and then the second spot behind the decimal is hundredths. So that's 88 over 100. Okay, I can divide these both by 4, and that is 22 over 25. Okay, if I have decimals to percents, okay, same thing that we did before when we changed a fraction to a decimal and then to a percent. Okay, I'm going to simply move my decimal 2 places to the right. Okay, so I start it here, I go 1, 2. My percent is 75%. Okay, if I had a whole number with my decimal, okay, I would still move it 2 spots, and then my percent would actually be over 100. It would be 312%. Okay, and just a reminder that if I only have one spot behind the decimal, I still move it twice, and I add in my 0. 1/10 is the same thing as 10%. Okay, if I have more than 2 digits, I still only move it 2 spots to the right. So 376 thousandths is the same thing as 37 and 6/10%. Alright, the last section we need to talk about is percents to decimals and fractions. And that's this section right here. When I'm changing a percent to a decimal, it's very similar to changing a decimal to a percent, but instead of moving 2 places to the right, I'm going to move 2 places to the left. So when I have a number like 98%, okay, the first thing I have to figure out, well, is that there's no decimal on here. So remember, just like any other thing, the decimal is always at the end. Okay, now to change it to an actual decimal without my percent sign, I move it 2 spots to the left. So 98% is the same thing as 98 hundredths. Okay, if I have a percent that's over 100, okay, my decimal still starts at the end, and I still move it 2 places to the left. So 125% would be the same thing as 1 and 25 hundredths. Okay, same thing applies if I have a decimal already in my percent. Still move it 2 places to the left. And 87 and 5/10 is the same thing as 875 thousandths. Alright, so percent to a fraction, okay, very similar to a decimal to a fraction, okay, except that if I have a number like 50%, the whole of a percent is always 100, okay, percents out of 100. So 50% would be the same thing as 50 out of 100. Okay, and then again, you always have to simplify. So I can divide both of these by 50 and get 1/2. So 50% is the same thing as 1/2. Okay, where it can be tricky is if I have 20 and 5/10%. Okay, I can't have a decimal and a fraction at the same time. So I want to think about it as 20 and 5/10 over 100, but I got to get rid of that decimal, so I move that to the right, and by doing that I actually have to add a 0. Okay, so you can also think about it as, if I make this a decimal first, I have 205 thousandths, that's 205 over 1,000, and then of course I would have to simplify. Okay, same thing applies if I have over 100%. I'm going to have, let's say 120%. I'm going to put 120 over 100, but now that's an improper fraction. So that's actually going to be 1 and 20 over 100. And I simplify that down, and I have 1 and 1/5. Alright, the last thing we're going to talk about is being able to find a percent of a number. Okay, what that means is you walk into a store and they say, well, this shirt is 20% off. Okay, we want to figure out how much money did you save. Okay, same thing with test scores. You know you have to get a 75% on your test in order to pass. Okay, how many questions can you get wrong? Or how many do you have to get right? Okay, as you get older and you eat more at restaurants and start paying for it by yourself, okay, when you have a waitress, they expect tips. Okay, so if your bill is $12.50, okay, most people say to leave a 10% tip. You need to figure out how much money is that. Okay, all different ways of using percent of a number. So if you look at your blue sheet, okay, it kind of walks you through the different steps to finding a percent of a number. Okay, if you look up here, you see percent is all about multiplying. The word of means to multiply. So basically I'm going to take 70% times 150. Now, the problem with that is I can't multiply percents. I first need to change them to a decimal. Okay, so if you go back to your yellow sheet, okay, and what we just practiced on, you change a percent to a decimal by moving the spot 2 places to the left. Okay, so if I look at 70%, my decimal is at the end. So it's like looking at 70, I move it 2 places to the left. That gives me 70 hundredths. Okay, now we can just go ahead and multiply. Now this is review from yesterday. I have 150 times 70%, okay, or 70 hundredths. Now, a couple of things. Remember, I don't line up my decimals. And second thing, I don't need the 0 behind the 70. Okay, I can just actually make that 7/10 to make my multiplication easier. So I have 150 times 7/10. Okay, 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 5 is 35. Carry the 3. 7 times 1 plus 3 is 10. Now I don't have any decimal spots behind the 150, but I have one spot behind 7 for a total of 1. Okay, so I start here and I move it one spot over, and 70% of 150 is 105. Alright, let's do the next one. So I have to have 40% of 120. Okay, first thing I want to do is change my percent to a decimal by moving it 2 spots to the left. So 40%, it's like looking at 40 with my decimal at the end. Move it 2 spots to the left. That's like 40 hundredths, or 4/10. Okay, now I multiply, because of here means to multiply. So I have 4/10 times 120. Okay, I have 120. So I've taken 120 times 4. 4 times 0 is 0. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 1 is 4. Okay, there's no decimal spots with 120. There's one spot behind the decimal here for a total of 1. I move that over. And 40% of 120 is 48. Now, I can use my estimation skills to kind of figure this out. 40% is really close to 50%. And 50%, remember, is half, because it's 50 over 100. And if I think about half of 120, or 120 divided by 2, okay, I get 60. And 60 is pretty close to 48, so I would say that my answer is pretty accurate. Alright, let's try one more. 60% of 70. Okay, so I have 60%. I put my decimal, move it 2 spots to the left. That's like 60 hundredths, or 6/10. So I'm going to take 6/10 times 70. 70 times 6/10. It's like 70 times 6. Okay, I have one spot here. Moves it one spot down here. My answer is 42. Okay, I'm going to do one where there is more than one digit with the percent. So I have, let's say, 55%. And I want to find 55% of 180. Okay, so I have to make 55% into a decimal. So here's my decimal. Move it 2 spots over. That is 55 hundredths. Of means to multiply 180. So 180 times 55 hundredths. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 8 is 40. 5 times 1 plus 4 is 9. Okay, this 5 becomes 0. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 8 is 40. 5 times 1 plus 4 is 9. Add those two together. Okay, and I get 9,900. But remember, I don't have any decimal spots here, but I have 2 spots here, making this actually 99. So 55% of 180 is 99. Alright, so now you have 2 tasks. The first task you need to do is you need to go on Schoology, and you need to take the percent quick check. Okay, your second task is to flip over the blue sheet and complete the problems. If you don't get them done today, they need to be due on Thursday. If you happen to get done with both 1 and number 2, okay, then you can go up and see Mr. Hamner. And he has a great activity for you to do. Okay, also, number 4, remember your green worksheet is due tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day.